Okay, a friend sent me this video today produced by the YouTube channel Captain Titus Frost. The title of the video is Honest Discussion on Anarchy versus Constitutionalism Wanted, High Impact Flicks Requested. Now, Titus and I briefly communicated via video back and forth in the past, and it didn't seem to go too well. If I remember right, it centered around his ardent support for Donald Trump, who, like all presidents do, ended up selling the time and laboring energies of our unborn children and grandchildren to the international banksters and the big pharma corporations. Not to mention, Donald J. Trump was bailed out by the Rothschilds banking cartel back in the 90s, supported anti-Second Amendment red flag laws, boosted the coffers of the military-industrial complex, and a myriad of other anti-American actions. According to Donald J. Trump, his crowning achievement was Operation Warp Speed. He even labeled himself as the father of the VAXX. Now, according to Titus, he was once an anarchist, specifically an anarcho-capitalist. Now he's become, I'm assuming, a constitutionalist. Under the video, he writes, I think the truth community would benefit from an honest discussion on whether we should be for anarchism or constitutionalism for America. I would prefer to debate, discuss, whatever with High Impact Flicks because he has responded to me in video before and has a much larger audience than most. And before we get into this video, I'd like to use as a launching point a quote that may be spuriously attributed to Thomas Jefferson and one from Lysander Spooner. Jefferson supposedly said, "The two enemies of the people are criminals and government. So let us tie the second down with the chains of the Constitution so the second will not become the legalized version of the first." Now, he may not have said that, but that is supposed to be the intent of the Constitution as articulated in the Declaration of Independence. And we all know it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And we'll leave on the back burner the fact that there can be no such thing as consent of the governed, and just focus on the fact that the writer here thinks that we need governments to secure individual rights. And this implies that any document that would be written up to accomplish this would, by necessity, have to bind the power of those who desire to infringe on those rights. And just as a side note, there is a draft of the Kentucky Resolution of 1798 where Jefferson is recorded as saying, quote, "In questions of power then, let no more be heard of confidence in men, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." And this may be conflated with Ayn Rand's statement in her essay, Man's Rights, which says, there are two potential violators of man's rights, the criminals and the government. The great achievement of the United States, she says, was to draw a distinction between these two by forbidding to the second the legalized version of the activities of the first. So it seems like Jefferson's ideal, as seen in the Declaration of Independence, is that the government is supposed to be here to protect the rights of all men, and the Constitution would be the restraining influence that's supposed to make that happen. Which leads us to Lysander Spooner's observation that whatever the Constitution may be, this much is certain. It has either authorized such a tyrannical government as we have, or it has been powerless to stop it. In either case, the Constitution is unfit to exist. Now, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, what was the supreme law of the land when the IRS came into being on July 9th, 1953? Although there is a case that can be made that its precursor was brought into existence by tyrant Lincoln in 1862 when he signed into law a revenue-raising measure to help pay for the War of Northern Aggression that everybody seems to like to call the Civil War. But the answer in both 1862 and 1953 is the Constitution was the restraining law or the supreme law of the land. So what was the law of the land when the Federal Reserve took over the nation's currency in 1913? What was the law of the land when the income tax went into effect in that same year? And what was the law of the land that was supposed to protect us from the advent of the Department of Homeland Security in 2002? How about when the FBI was formed, or the CIA, or the NSA, TSA, the DEA? What constitutional law protected us from the long, costly, failed drug war? We all know the answer. It was supposed to be the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, but it didn't quite achieve its purpose there. One more question before we get into Titus's video. What is anarchy? Simply put, it comes from the Greek prefix "an," meaning without, and the Greek noun archon, meaning master or ruler. It only means without or in the absence of rulers or masters. Does anybody in reality have a legitimate right to rule you? Do they have the right to be your masters and you their slaves? If the answer is no, then you, my friend, are an anarchist. One who does not buy into the fiction that underpins the fallacy of all governments. And that fiction is that another man can rightfully claim ownership of you as its property and the things that you claim to own. Government practically lived out simply means the right to rule. And we all know that no one has the right to rule you. Or do you think that they do? Therefore, government from the very start of this conversation is as fictional as Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy. So let's get into this video.
Hello everyone. So I just wanted to make a quick video with a debate challenge to anyone in the anarchist community. Because I've seen a lot of these types of people commenting, and the thing is, I was an anarchist. Originally, I was an anarcho-capitalist because I listened to a lot of the people in the truth community that made me feel like that was the solution to the problem of the New World Order.
Living without the coercive, violent force of government, which is exactly what the New World Order is, it's just a more overtly evil form of government. Living without buying into the mass delusion that men can be ruled by other men is exactly the solution. If the problem with the world is men controlling other men against their will, then the answer is that the men being controlled need to renew their minds, call out the immorality that they see for what it is, and punish those who violate the will of others. That is the answer.
Now, if you really look at what anarchism means and what anarcho-capitalism would end up as, that is basically what the multinational corporations would want, which is the removal of the government, which is the only thing that regulates them.
First of all, we currently have multinational corporations that have sprung forth and prospered in the petri dish of none other than the Constitution. Second, corporations require the apparatus of the state or governments to even exist. Without government, you have no corporations. There's nothing natural or organic about corporations. The free market doesn't create corporations. Governments do. If we have a problem with multinational corporations, and we do, we have only government to thank for that. Yet this is exactly what Titus wants. He wants a government, therefore he'll have the corporations that go along with the existence of government. So he has a fundamental misunderstanding of what government is and the evil it spawns, while criticizing the moral high ground of voluntaristic anarchist thought.
And the complete removal of things like freedom of speech, the Second Amendment, which are only guaranteed as limits on the government. See, that's the key to stopping the New World Order.
Now, if those limits articulated in the Constitution serve as the key to stopping the New World Order, it did a cruddy job.
Is having a extremely limited government, right, which we have through the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights.
Take a look around. Do we have a limited government, or do we have a bloated, out of control, all-out police surveillance state which controls everything, including the issuance and value of our currency?
Now, the powers that shouldn't be have done everything they can to undermine the Bill of Rights, undermine the First Amendment, and undermine the Second Amendment. and the Fourth Amendment and all of the others. However, those still exist on paper.
Think of the insanity of that statement. Those limits still exist on paper, but the powers that shouldn't be ignored that paper, wiped their butts with it, and grew even more powerful as they used the Constitution to create a court system and a web of regulation to violate our rights under color of law.
And there are limits on government, not on big corporations. So a big corporation can censor you, take away your gun rights, all of those things. They can say their business is a gun-free zone and you're not allowed to have your gun rights in their private property.
Titus is literally making an argument against the Constitution here. The Constitution, specifically the Bill of Rights, is supposed to limit governments. So the governments work around that and create corporations that don't have to submit to the limitations of the Constitution. Then they turn the United States itself into a corporation, as seen in 28 U.S.C. 3002-15A, which says United States means a federal corporation.
Now, if we turn over from having governments to having just anarchism, the problem with that is the Bill of Rights doesn't apply to corporations. So if you have a society that's run by multinational corporations and there are no governments, there's no governments to regulate and limit what private corporations can do to the citizens inside their territory.
Again, the United States government itself is a corporation. And before it was a corporation, they still didn't allow themselves to be hindered or their evil thwarted by the Bill of Rights. It's flat out childish thinking to imagine that words written on a page will keep a group of federal agents from breaking down your door at 3 o'clock this morning. You can point to the Fourth Amendment all you want when that happens. They've already shot your dog, flashbanged your child, and broke your wife's arm.
So it definitely benefits the banking class and the elite, the Bilderbergers, to have anarchism.
He says this in spite of the fact that the elites and the Bilderbergers have benefited massively by the court system, which routinely violates the Bill of Rights. If the majority of people were enlightened to this nonsensical fiction and rejected the fairy tale of government, how likely do you think it would be that the elites could possibly grow to be so powerful? For example, how in the world could we possibly be $31 trillion in debt if just say 30% of the people had an anarchist, non-right to rule outlook on life?
Because then you would have no government in the way, and you would have no Bill of Rights in your way in terms of creating a digital gulag for all of the people. So that's why I'm not for anarchism.
Let me reiterate the painfully obvious fact that digital gulags exist today and will only get worse, not because we're in an atmosphere of anarchy, but because we have rulers who manipulate the masses with the idea of the legitimacy of government through documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
Because I do see the problems with the governments of the world, and I do understand that governments have killed more people, yada, yada, yada. The thing is, those governments have done that are socialist, communist governments, right, that don't have the Bill of Rights.
It's astonishing to me that he would even say this. The American government has had the Bill of Rights for over, 240 years? And it's responsible for the slaughter of many, many millions of people with their military-industrial complex war machine. Our country is predicated on the immoral transfer of wealth. That's socialism. You can call it whatever you want. Socialism, communism, Marxism. China was a republic with a constitution. Germany had a constitution and a Bill of Rights. Words on paper do not stop the evil of man. And if the problem with the world is that men are evil, then the last thing you'd want to do is hand those evil men the keys to something called government.
So if you look at America, we're not perfect. We have many, many problems. And the biggest problem our country has is our government has gone well beyond what it was allowed to do by the Constitution.
So what he just said here is exactly what Lysander Spooner said. The Constitution could not stop the advancement of the elite, And yet he still wants to argue for a failed system while arguing against the morally superior position of voluntarism or anarchy.
It's violating the Bill of Rights and all these things. So in my opinion, the answer is a return to a constitutional basis and an extremely limited government where you have the protection of the Bill of Rights, not anarchism.
So in other words, a return to the very same thing that exacerbated an ever-growing problem that we currently have to deal with.
Because there are no working examples, and this is the big thing for me. There's no working examples of anarchy. Every time someone's tried to create like an anarchist community, it devolves into a communist, totalitarian nightmare where you have like these thugs that are armed running the society.
He just described what we have today, only it devolved not under anarchy, but under that which he wants to return to, the Constitution. Further, saying that there are no working examples of anarchy in society is exactly like saying back in the 1800s, there are no working examples of where we can get along in life without slaves. To put it another way, saying that there are no working examples of anarchy is like saying there are no working examples of people cooperating under mutually agreeable partnerships and contracts. It's like saying there are no working examples of being moral people who reject fairy tales, so we might as well participate in the fiction and do the evil that got us where we currently are today. It makes no sense.
And that's the thing with anarchists. They think that, oh, if we just get rid of governments, everyone's going to live in this utopia and everyone will be nice to each other and no one will shoot each other or rape each other. It's all horseshit.
Guys, I've never heard a true anarchist say that. If they actually did say that, it's a very ignorant statement.
You have to have a police force. We've seen what removing the police force in certain areas has done. I mean, hashtag call a social worker, right?
We should all know by now that police forces don't stop crime. As a matter of fact, when you call a cop, by the time they get there, the crime has already been committed. The reason crime rises in areas, even in areas where there's a heavily funded police force, is because people are criminalized by politicians. If anything, cops make things worse by turning off their minds and just following the commands of politicians. I mean, you've heard it before. Well, I'm just following orders. I didn't make the rules, I just enforce them. They are the true road pirates and economic terrorists of our day.
So, obviously, anarchism is not the solution. And I'm willing to debate anyone on that, especially, I think, High Impact Flicks, who has responded to my other videos. I think we could have a quality discussion about this, HIF, and I don't see why we shouldn't. If you're going to sit there and tell everyone and advocate for non-compliance and removing yourself from the political situation,
just let what he said sink in. I'm not even going to comment on that.
As our country's being destroyed by politicians run by multinational corporations, I think you're hurting the truth community. I think by advocating for anarchism and not getting involved politically, you're hurting the truth community. We should be lobbying our local representatives to do the things that we want.
In the previous clip, he just said that our country is being destroyed by multinational corporations.
As our country's being destroyed by politicians run by multinational corporations.
But then he wants to lobby those same politicians to do the things that we want? If there was ever a clear example of cognitive dissonance, this is it.
And I've advocated for that in the past. And I think until the politicians start doing what we tell them we want them to do, we should be voting for every non-incumbent to fire every one of these people in office.
In other words, let's just keep doing what we've been doing and keep expecting a different result.
They shouldn't be in there for a huge long career when they're just using that career to destroy our country. And if we just remove ourselves from the political process, what good is being on YouTube? What good is waking people up if you're just going to let the bankers and the politicians do whatever they want? It's pointless. You're just selling food buckets. You're just getting likes and subscribes because you're telling people what they want to hear.
Well, in reality, people don't want to hear about anarchy. They want to hear about the left versus right paradigm lie. They want to hear if you're a Republican, or they want to believe that you're a Democrat. There's this team red and team blue mentality that's widely accepted by society. Why? Because they've been indoctrinated by the public fool system to be compliant, to obey authorities, to play nice within the current governmental system, and your life will be comfortable while they continue stealing your time and laboring energies through the Federal Reserve and the IRS. Waking people up to the fact that government in any form is slavery is the only thing that will get the slaves off the plantation. But Titus wants us to continue putting our ballot in the slave suggestion box so we can beg for a nicer plantation master.
Yeah, I agree that the federal income tax is theft. But that's because it's only there to pay the private central banks that have no right to print our money in the first place. So we need to return to the Constitution, not some sort of LARPy nonsense move to no government, which is never going to happen and would never work, period. Never has worked. There's no working examples of it. It's been tried.
What's ironic about this video is that on camera, Titus is engaged in anarchy. He's traveling down the road without asking permission. Without a ruler, he decides to make a video. Without a ruler, he owns a dog, and he knows full well that no one in this world has the right to rule him and take his dog or steal his car or say he can't record with his phone. He's living out the anarchy lifestyle before our very eyes.
There's no society that's able to do that because you eventually have to coordinate with other people in order to protect the weak. And that's the problem. Anarchy doesn't protect the weak from the powerful.
The only thing is that the Constitution hasn't protected the weak from the powerful. It's actually empowered the powerful and made the weak weaker.
And eventually, in an anarchist state, people will just band together, get more powerful than other people, and take over.
Nothing could possibly take over as completely as the federal government and the Federal Reserve, which again, didn't happen under anarchy, but under statism.
Happens every time, which is why you need a constitution, which is written law, which means government, not anarchy. You can't have a constitution and a Bill of Rights in an anarchist society because in anarchism, you have no laws.
Here, Titus demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of anarchism/voluntarism. Anarchy just means no rulers, not no rules.
That also means no laws limiting government. That means no laws limiting corporations. It means the corporations can do whatever they want to you.
Kind of like they're essentially doing right now under the Constitution.
Can't have that. You need a Bill of Rights and a Constitution. Anarchy is a joke and a LARP, and I'll debate anyone, especially high-impact flicks, that makes those statements. And I'll hopefully be back tonight with the show. Obviously, I'm able to talk again.
Okay, guys, I'm going to leave this here. Leave your thoughts about this for the world and the government-protected corporations in the comments section below. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification icon, give it a thumbs up, share it with everybody you know. And don't forget to subscribe to my private email list through my website, highimpactflix.com. I will see you in the next video.